Great. So, welcome everybody to the Evergreen Community Action Group's educational and community engagement series called Funding Cuts to the FDA, CDC, and NIH. Why should I care and what can I do about it? We are really sorry. Many of you who have joined us today may not be aware, but this forum is intended to be a forum that engages the local community. And we had set it up so we would be at the Evergreen Library this afternoon. And tragically, there was a shooting at the Evergreen High School. And so the library was closed, which is right across from the Evergreen High School. And we've had to just try to convert this over to a virtual event for everybody. So we're just very, very sad about the events that have happened and understand that our community has been in a panic until and recently and still is ongoing. So, on that note, I still think we are going to go ahead and host this. There are a lot of people that are very interested in this topic and that wanted to attend. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Penny Moore, and I am with the Evergreen Community Action Group. And for those of you who are not aware of who we are, we were formed this year with the idea of providing an opportunity for education, discussion, and action on controversial topics in our community. Regarding discussion, it's very important that we have an avenue to allow for engagement between the speakers and the audience. And regretfully, because we are not live now, we are going to have to just do this through the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. We do have somebody who's going to be monitoring that, but discussion is a really important aspect of these series that we have put on. And do feel free to ask questions through that. We have somebody who is monitoring the Q&A. Also regarding discussion, we really are hoping to attract people with diverse viewpoints. We have advertised this to a lot of different groups and organizations and are not looking for this to be necessarily partisan in nature. We're hoping to avoid the online bickering and actually have a discussion in person. Regarding action, I've asked every one of our speakers to come away with some concrete action steps about what we can do about the concerns that are raised today. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the structure for this meeting. The meeting is being recorded, and if for those people who weren't able to attend and you'd like to get a copy of this, I think we would be able to arrange that. There are a series of reading materials that were recommended by the panelists. They're really great. I sent them out to all the people that registered in advance, but I think that there are quite a few people that may not have had a chance to register in advance because we were scrambling so much to get the word out for people to register to attend virtually rather than in person. But if people would like those materials, please let me know. I have my email at the end of this presentation, and you can send that to me. The structure is that each of the panelists are going to be speaking for about 12 minutes, and then I want to make sure that all the panelists speak before we turn it over to Q&A. And hopefully we'll have about 40 minutes of Q&A at that point in time. So let me go ahead and introduce our esteemed panel. I'm very honored to have them with us today. Dr. Rob Califf is a cardiologist, and he's currently on the faculty at the Duke University School of Medicine. He served as the FDA commissioner under Obama from 2015 through 2017, and again, most recently under Biden from 2022 through 2025. He also is the prior vice chancellor for clinical and translational research at Duke University. Dr. Tom Kenyon is a pediatrician and epidemiologist who served as CDC's Director of Global Health and Chief Medical Officer for the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, also known as PEPFAR, which is a project that was championed by President George W. Bush, which is credited with having saved 25 million lives from HIV/AIDS. He also served as Chief Medical Officer and CEO for Project Hope, a global health nonprofit organization, and he's now retired and living in Tucson, Arizona. And finally, we have Josie Briggs. Dr. Briggs is a nephrologist and former interim executive director of the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. She also is the former director of the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health at NIH from 2008 through 2017, and former division director for the kidney, urologic, and hematologic diseases at the National Institutes for Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases at NIH from 1994 through 2007. She is currently retired and living in Maine, but as she says, she is paying attention. We had hoped that we would be joined, that Lily Cervantes, Dr. Lily Cervantes would join Josie Briggs for her remarks. She's the director of immigrant health at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. Regretfully, she had to go away for family emergency, and so Josie's still going to talk a little bit about her research. So with that, and without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Rob, and hold on just a second, Rob, while I get this set up. And Rob, if you could go ahead and turn on your video and unmute. And there we go. Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Penny. It's good to be with you all although I know it is a tragic day, especially there in Evergreen, but also in other parts of the U.S. And I'm sure we'll end up with some discussion about that issue before we get through it. But my assignment is to talk about the FDA, which I had the privilege of leading on two occasions, and also serving as a civil servant from 2015 to 2016 before becoming a political appointee as the commissioner of the FDA. Thought what I'd do is just briefly describe the function of the FDA, the reason it's there, and then speak a bit about what's happened with the FDA budget and what the consequences of that may be. And I'm sure in the discussion we'll talk quite a bit about people's ideas for what might be done about that. Well, I'd start by saying, in order to understand the FDA, it really is an organization that was created in 1906 in its initial form as a reaction to a tragedy. In the case in 1906, it was a milk wagon horse who was being used to develop tetanus, diphtheria antitoxin, and ended up giving tetanus to a bunch of children who died. And this led to the concept that there ought to be somebody regulating the production of biologics. That was the beginning of the FDA. And in fact, almost every additional assignment given to the FDA by the Congress or the executive branch has been the result of something bad that happened and then a realization that something needed to be done about it and someone needed to oversee that area of commerce. So we fast forward from 1906 to today. The FDA is responsible for regulating approximately 20% of the economy, a wide variety of commodities, almost all of which you would recognize. And I think it's useful to think about the function of the FDA in two dimensions. The first is, what does it regulate? And then the second is, how are the priorities of the FDA organized around the functions of regulation? So in terms of what the FDA regulates, we really start with food. Food was really at the basis of the FDA in the early years. Once again, the regulation initially promulgated because of unsafe food that not only made people sick but killed them in the 1920s and 1930s in particular. Food regulation makes up about 40% of the effort of the FDA altogether. It's a vast system and includes not only food in the United States, but around the world. And it's shared to some extent with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which has a number of other functions, but there's no reason for any of you to think about this on a day-to-day basis. But a simple way to think about what the FDA regulates versus the Ag Department. The Agriculture Department regulates barnyard animals and catfish. So pigs, chickens, and cows are regulated by the Agriculture Department, and all the rest of the food supply is FDA regulated. Everyone, of course, then thinks about drugs, which is a major role of the FDA, not only the innovator drugs that are frequently in the news, but also generic drugs that make up over 90% of current prescriptions. The FDA also regulates devices, and this ranges from very simple devices like thermometers and bed rails and hospital gowns to extraordinarily complex devices, increasingly including the use of artificial intelligence embedded in devices. And then we move to biologics, which is a rapidly evolving area, very much in the news as we think about the editing of the human genome, gene therapy of children with rare disease, for example, but also very much in the news, vaccines or in the biologics part of the FDA. Each of the areas I've mentioned so far has its own center with experts in each of those areas that oversee it. The newest part of the FDA is tobacco. People think that the FDA started regulating tobacco back in the days of David Kessler. That was very much in the news. But it turns out Kessler lost the battle in the Supreme Court. And it was only in Obama's first year as president that the Center for Tobacco Products was formed. And tobacco is sort of an outlier because in the rest of the FDA, the assumption is that the industries are trying to make products that improve health, and they just need to be regulated to guide things in the right direction and to catch people that are trying to take advantage of the system. But in tobacco, the products have no health benefit. It's nothing but risk. And the mandate in the law instructs the FDA just to minimize the risk under certain conditions that were agreed to by Congress. One interesting part of which is it's illegal for the FDA to ban nicotine from the product, which is, of course, the addictive substance in both tobacco and in vaping products that gets people hooked pretty much for life in many cases. And then there are a whole variety of products that are regulated by the FDA that fall into niches that are very important. Dietary supplements is an example, very lightly regulated because of the laws that exist. Cosmetics, an area that just got strengthened regulation during my term, and we tend to think of cosmetics as being innocuous, but there are a number of them that actually have very significant health effects that need to be regulated. And radiation emitting products, including microwave ovens and the surfaces of cooking pots and pans. So there's a lot of stuff regulated by the FDA, which makes the job of commissioner quite interesting. Now, what do we do in terms of the regulation? Job number one is safety. And as I've already said, most of the regulation is in place because something bad happened that led to the construction of a set of regulations to try to prevent that from happening again. But at the same time, written into the law for the FDA and into the rules and regulations is a mandate for the FDA to also stimulate innovation in the economy. The public has made it very clear that it doesn't just want to be protected, it also wants access to new products that might bring additional health benefits. And I'm sure in the NIH discussion, this will come up. As I've already mentioned, tobacco has its own special place in terms of mission. And then there's a fourth, there's a fourth and a fifth area. The fourth area is really, really hard and has been very much in the limelight. The FDA is uh, assigned the job of educating the public and the clinical community in the case of medical products about the risks and benefits of products, not telling the public what it should do, but simply elucidating what the risks and benefits are. Communicating with 360 million people is the most daunting task I've ever seen. And I've done some hard jobs like running intensive care units. The last part of the FDA in my first term brought quizzical stares when I brought it up, but now people readily understand what it is. It's protecting the public from immediate threats, including pandemics, nuclear catastrophes, and other public health emergencies, tornadoes. You may remember during the hurricane that struck my home state of North Carolina, we almost lost complete access to intravenous fluids in this country, a big issue for the FDA. So that emergency response is something shared across government. Now, how do you regulate 20% of the economy with 20,000 people, which is what I had? It was actually not possible to do it just with those people. It's very dependent on a systematic set of rules and guidances that the industries agree to work with, and then the FDA oversees it with the person power and intelligence it has through the digital environment that we all live in now. But if you think about 8 billion people in hundreds of countries and all of the deepness of the supply chains now that we all live with, it's a job where it's a constant effort to decide where the prioritization should go. So that gets us to the budget. As of today, as best we can tell, about 20 to 25% of the workforce at the FDA has gone either through firings or layoffs or people who were unhappy with the direction of things. And this has led to a lot of short staffing and puts a lot of things at risk, but not in a way that's just immediately obvious, as might be the case in a healthcare delivery system. I think the best analogy for FDA, it's as if you're running a city and you decide not to fix the potholes. Well, everything's okay for a while, and you never know which pothole is going to show up and create a problem, but you can bet that there is going to be a problem. So, as a former commissioner, and I think I speak for all the former commissioners, we're very concerned about the budget cuts. We think there is a threat to the public health, and it's on both sides, both the safety side and the innovation side, because the guidance from the FDA is critical to the industries that make products. So I'll stop there and look forward to the rest of the discussion. Penny, are you still there?
Yes, here we go. I'm turning it over to Josie. Josie, could you unmute and turn your video on? Thank you.
Do you hear me?
I do. Thank you very much.
So, thank you, Rob. First of all, just a brief sympathy to people in Evergreen. What a shocker this must be in your quiet community. All of us are aware and have read about school shootings, but most of us have not been quite this close to them. So, I extend my sympathies. I also want to start with a short tribute to Penny. Penny and I had worked together at Macquarie, it occurs to me that our, her Colorado colleagues may not know about her superb credentials and published contributions as a health economist. You have a real expert on economic health policy in your midst. And I also want to extend a quick tribute to the team organizing this forum. You have it exactly right. We are being asked what we can do. But the starting point to addressing current problems, including the funding ones and others, is to come together to share insights, to share facts. So I think you can go to my next slide, Penny. So
Yeah.
yeah, in the trilogy of your presenters, I'm here to represent the NIH. Now, the NIH is the biggest funder and driver of of research on health and disease in the world. Our budget is about $50 billion. We fund research all over the country, in fact, historically all over the world. Biggest funder in the world of the kind of biomedical research that drives innovation. It drives NIH funding underlies most new drugs, uh, most of the new cancer cures, and many of the practical improvements, including how you make an ICU work, uh, in things that make our health better. It The administration, the current administration, has been pursuing policies that have been destructive to the CDC, and you'll hear more about that from Tom. And as Rob just mentioned, a very destructive decrease in funding for the FDA. It's also pursued policies that have been destructive to the NIH, but money is currently not in the top of this list. It's more in attacks on programs and the attack that Rob mentioned, attack on the staffing and people. Could I have the next slide, please? So to first talk about money. When Penny first proposed this meeting, money wasn't first and foremost in our worry list. But for the NIH, things have changed a bit, and there's a positive message here. The initial presidential proposal was a 40% cut in funding for the NIH. That is drastic, unprecedented. However, many people care, and advocacy has worked. In response to the loud voices of many advocates, particularly disease advocates, perhaps some of you on this call, both House and Senate have passed initial funding bills blocking the proposed cuts and actually mandating modest increases. Now, the funding debates are still going on. The final numbers are still uncertain, but I think all the people watching this are expecting that NIH budgets will at least be flat. It appears that advocacy has protected the NIH budget. And so that tells us all that what we're doing together really does matter. Well, the ballots about funding are not yet solved. There is, oh, don't here. Don't go forward yet, quite yet. There is active concern about the funds that have already been awarded and promised. There are 670 million committed in awards to universities and hospitals in Colorado. And we are learning that the funds are moving much more slowly than usual. Investigators are being asked to make some revisions, and I'll tell you something about the kind of revisions that, and many awards are just being canceled. The number of new awards is at an all-time low, about 1/4 of previous years. And in the question and answers time, we may talk a little about the Office of Management and Budget and how they are interfering with the flow of dollars. Can we keep going? But I want to also tell you about problems with programs. A major focus of the current Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy, is a multi-pronged attack on vaccines. And what has been most startling to many of us is a specific and focused attack on mRNA vaccines. That includes the anti-COVID vaccines that were developed during the previous Trump administration. Now, I suspect many of you remember from high school biology, mRNA. M stands for messenger. And the mRNA is the molecule that goes between DNA and the actual synthesis of a protein. The wonderful thing about the mRNA technology is that it's much faster than previous ways of developing vaccines, which focused on how to make the protein. The advantage is that the vaccine can be developed quickly. If the virus mutates, the vaccine can be modified. And in fact, there's also great promise of this technology for directing attacks, cancer chemotherapy, directing attacks for the body to attack tumors. So an incredibly promising technology that through the COVID vaccine period led to just striking positive results. During the recent hearing last week, Senator Kennedy made some statements about the risks and efficacy on the COVID mRNA vaccine that were just flat wrong. So as I was preparing this talk, I just felt obliged to tell you what the actual evidence is, to show you a couple of the papers that have provided clear evidence that mRNA vaccines work and they're safe. Can you click that? Yeah, so in the study published, systematic review published in 21, they reviewed almost 60,000 cases, 46,000 controls who received placebo, and the mRNA vaccine was 95% efficacious compared to, and the adeno vaccine was also. Next slide. And a more recent review has looked at the impact on hospitalizations, and again, incredible efficacy in protecting people from severe disease that required hospitalization. So this has been an incredible success. And Kennedy has elected to withdraw 500 million in vaccine reserve research and cancel it. Totally incomprehensible, I think, to most of us who followed the events of the last 5 years. Can we go forward in the slides? One more. Keep going. So there's another piece of programmatic effects of the current administration that I want to tell you about. And that's on programs that fall broadly under the label DEI, or which stands for diversity, equity, inclusion. In some ways, this has been driven by a serious misunderstanding. DEI research programs were not affirmative action or creating hiring advantages. Clinical research has to recruit patients to be part of the studies. A lot of recruitment happens at academic health centers where the patient population is not terribly diverse. NIH, recognizing the need to have research studies that really represented the patients affected by disease, has established a number of programs that the centerpiece of which is patient outreach, patient engagement. This is essential if the research is going to be valid and applicable. Kidney research, my field, isn't totally a clear example of this. Kidney failure is about 4 times more common in African Americans than white Americans, about twice as common in people of Hispanic ethnicity. A leader in this work is a Colorado investigator who Penny mentioned in the introduction, who I'd hoped to be able to join us today. But Lily Cervantes is a professor of medicine at the University of Colorado, who's been a real lead in establishing programs that address patient diversity and engagement. She's currently leading a program already started, recruited a good number of patients. One of 6 centers across the country, trying to figure out how to engage people with kidney disease from diverse groups. It's a pragmatic trial. Rob and I have both worked together on pragmatic trial methods, and it's comparing a variety of engagement methods, but one of them is having community workers who also speak Spanish, reaching out to people with kidney disease who are Latinx. And it has control groups in which these workers are not used, and will compare the outcome and rate of kidney failure in the two groups. Colorado is lucky to have someone like Lily because she's really been an incredible advocate and activist for reaching out to underserved groups. And so and her program on this has been stopped and started and stopped and started. There's some legal challenges ongoing, but it's a wonderful study across the country, and I hope it eventually happens. But it's an example of what the administration has viewed as unacceptable DEI research. Okay, one last comment. My next slide, people. I know my co-panelists agree on this. The impact of current policies is having very disastrous effects on young investigators. We are all seeing people afraid of the impact of funding cuts on the work they hope to do. We are also seeing incredible impact, and Rob mentioned this, that about 20,000 workers at HHS have been fired or have left their jobs. FDA, CDC, and NIH have all been impacted with loss of critical people. And this is an impact that I think all these programs are seeing. So I'm going to stop at this point. I'm looking forward to the discussion, to hearing questions and comments from the audience.
Thanks, Josie. So I'm going to turn it over to Tom. Tom, if you could start your video and hold on.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Great. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you. Before I get into my talk about what is CDC and what effect these cuts are having, I just have a few opening comments. One is we're not political. We're here because we're health professionals and interested in seeing that agenda move forward. So that's point number one. Point number two is it's more than the cut in funding. We're seeing a very difficult ideology or set of ideologies imposed on our work that are as damaging as any funding cut can be. It's also the loss of staff, as you've seen in public resignations and so forth. The other is CDC is not in crisis. Secretary Kennedy is in crisis. He is our crisis. So when I see that in the press, I have to say, yes, we need to improve. I had left CDC before COVID-19. I left after the Ebola outbreak in West Africa in 2015. So I don't know in all the ins and outs, but yes, CDC had some missteps, but we're still living those mistakes and need to confront that. So let me begin with what is the CDC? Of course, we're one of the HHS agencies. We actually work closely with the FDA. In PEPFAR, for example, all the drugs are qualified by FDA standards. And with the NIH, we combine program with research sites. So we work together very collaboratively, and that makes our efficiency much, much greater. CDC has been the National Public Health Agency in the U.S. since 1946, following the end of the Second World War. We had eliminated malaria in the South, and there were more challenges to confront. So that's why we're set up in Atlanta. One of our early CDC directors, Bill Foege, a real hero of mine, because he was responsible for smallpox eradication, or partly responsible for the design of many people who are responsible. He liked to say that the power of science doesn't come from its existence. The power comes from its use. So CDC is heavily evidence-based in approaching its programs. CDC only has one political appointee, that's the director. And up until after COVID, they weren't even confirmed by the Senate. Now the director is confirmed by the Senate. And obviously there's been a lot in the press about that lately. Also, people may not be aware, CDC actually has no jurisdiction over the state and large city health departments. There are 3,500 state and local health departments. So somehow we have to do our job to help coordinate that so that we don't have total chaos in approaching our public health issues, so that we have standards that all can follow. So that's a very important role of CDC is state coordination and state support. 2/3 of the CDC budget is actually forwarded to state and local health departments. So any cut that comes to us, unfortunately, is passed on to the states, and believe me, they're feeling that, as I'll come to in a moment. Our role is to provide world-class expertise in the form of technical assistance, reference labs, and other expertise. One example was one of the professionals that resigned, Dan Jernigan. We were in EIS class together. He had been in influenza for 30 years and resigned because of the scientific concerns that he had. So people who come to CDC to have a career, to have a career that can save lives and support health systems worldwide. There in Colorado, you have a very important division of vector-borne diseases in Fort Collins. There's also a major laboratory there, and it's part of this 200 lab network across the country that CDC supports. So we translate evidence into public health guidelines to establish norms and standards for a wide range of conditions. And in view of the unfortunate shooting today, I forwarded gun violence prevention guidelines that are there and freely available to the public and health departments across the country. During emergencies, we help coordinate the response together with the state. We're always a guest in the state. We work closely with state health departments for both acute and chronic events, both infectious and non-infectious. We provide surge capacity in terms of personnel, supplies, and funding to local jurisdictions. And then we do a lot of training. So if you're really interested in the history of CDC, there's an excellent summary in the Congressional Library online. And also, to be a little lighter, you can watch the movie Contagion, and you'll see just how it works when it comes to an EIS officer. So what's been included in this, what I call assault on CDC, both in terms of ideology and funding? So we were told to face for 2026 a 50% cut in budget, 50%, and a 25% cut in staff, which is unprecedented. There was no thoughtful analysis, no assessment whatsoever in terms of what we lose and what are they trying to achieve with those staffing levels. It was just wholesale cuts. And it's been very mean and vindictive. That really surprised me in talking to colleagues, how cruel some of the layoffs can be. This kind of cut really slows us down in many ways. We're short on human resources, so recruiting personnel when we need them. We don't have fiscal managers, so even if we have the funding, it'll take longer to get it out to the states or sites that have an emergency. We've lost a whole network of reviewers who look at documents technically to ensure the best quality standards and best science are adhered to in our proposals. We've lost trainers, travel. CDC has to do a lot of travel, and we've lost communications personnel. So again, it's not just the money, it's what one colleague called it the scaffolding of CDC. We're also encountering new kinds of censorship. What can we say? What words can we use? What journals can we publish in? The secretary said yesterday, we're not going to publish in Lancet and New England Journal and on, because they're bought out by the pharmaceutical industry. So this is very damaging to our scientists' careers. We're seeing manipulation of data, manipulation of information. That's why the CDC director resigned, because the secretary was forcing her to adopt certain things without even seeing the data. You'll see more on this when she testifies in Congress next week. Then we see a pattern when they try to cut something. You'll see an outcry, and then they say, "Well, we're bringing it back." But when you look at how they're bringing it back, it's much smaller than it was before it was cut. So it's very cosmetic. We're losing a lot of programs, and you won't know until we try to implement those programs how badly they've been damaged. The administration also rescinded $11 billion in pandemic era funding back from the states. The states had to turn that money back and then lay off vaccinators, mental health experts, and stop with urgent programs like emergency preparedness and substance abuse programs. So let me quickly read through some other specific areas. It's been challenging to get this information because it's not publicized. I've had to scour the media, but here we go. In chronic disease prevention, we've lost the Office of Smoking and Health. It's been eliminated. Didn't the secretary just say that chronic disease is our biggest problem? Well, guess what? Tobacco is our biggest cause of chronic illness. So there's no match with what they're saying. The HIV/AIDS prevention, this is domestic, lost a quarter of their staff. The Global Health Center, which I used to run, lost a quarter of its staff. Injury prevention lost a third of its staff, and funding was frozen for youth violence prevention, for firearm injury prevention. Fortunately, they'll be able to retain the overdose prevention division and the suicide prevention branch at steady levels. So it's not all bad news. And there's some good people sticking around, but let me keep going. The maternal and child health branch, responsible for HIV in mothers and children, was shut down completely and 22 staff terminated. The FoodNet surveillance network, which monitors foodborne outbreaks, used to track 8 pathogens. Now they're only going to track 2 pathogens. So our ability to detect and follow foodborne outbreaks is going to be hampered. And also, a number of laboratories have lost samples because they couldn't keep on their lab workers, and so they spoiled, and that's something I can't cost. Those are costless, or very expensive losses right there. So let me close with 2 big risks that I'm seeing. One is vaccines. I'm seeing we're set up for an increase in vaccine preventable diseases due to declining coverage in children, driven by these conspiracy theories, pseudoscience, and vaccine skepticism, which is rampant across the political appointees. A lot depends on what the ACIP, the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices, does next week in their meeting September 25th to 26th. Let me summarize. Your insurance, Medicaid, won't pay for vaccines if they're not on the CDC schedule. To get on the CDC schedule, they have to be recommended by the ACIP. The ACIP is now controlled by Secretary Kennedy, and the approval by CDC is controlled by a temporary director, CDC director, who's a financial investor. We have nobody technical at the highest leadership. Again, that's unprecedented. Never happened before. So that's very dangerous. And I've seen these diseases. They're horrible. Hopefully, it'll be rectified, but that's how things stand now. The second area, and there are many more, but these are just 2 for the purpose of this discussion. We now have a perfect storm for the next pandemic. And this was commented on by the CDC epidemiologists, the center directors who resigned, and they were in charge of vaccines and flu and lung disease. We have inadequate surveillance. We're behind on preparation. We've had major budget and personnel cuts. At the level of the White House, the leadership position has not been filled for pandemic preparedness and response policy. This is 6 or 7 months into the administration, and we have nobody looking after pandemic preparedness. We have a very large susceptible population to any new pathogen. The winter months are coming. You've heard Rob and Josie talk about the cuts in mRNA vaccines. And that's very important because with mRNA vaccines, which are, and the president deserves credit here, you can ramp up quickly, relatively quickly. And if you listen to people like Mike Osterholm, like I do, he says we could ramp up, cover the United States in a year. If we don't have mRNA vaccines and use the old technologies, we won't be anywhere close to that. So then you'll get who can pay the most for the vaccines. So that's very, very alarming. We've also lost our alliance with WHO, something I used to pay a lot of attention to. And we used to share samples, flu samples, so we knew what was coming to us next year, and they knew because flu samples or flu migrates during the year. We're also seeing each state is now going on its own. We're becoming the divided states, not the United States, when it comes to pandemic preparedness. And when that happens, we start to fracture and we get competitive. And the smaller states or the less well-off states are going to suffer. And this is not good to be divided. You have to be united during a pandemic. And then last but not least, we have all these CDC reforms going on that are just a distraction. Our staff need to focus on the job ahead. So I'll close there. I think we need to better understand, why is this happening? What did we do? How can we change it? And maybe that's the discussion we're going to have now. But it's very alarming, and I don't mean to scare anybody. And knowledge will get you far. So pay attention to how this is moving, because it's moving fast. But I look forward to your questions and comments and next steps going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Hold on just a second, and I'm going to do this. Okay, great. Tom, if you could just turn your video back on, and are you back there? Okay. All right, we're good. Thank you very much. Before we start with our questions, I wanted to ask Josie. Josie, you raised your hand at some point during the meeting when Tom was speaking. I didn't know if you had some comment that you wanted to make.
Actually, thanks, Penny. No, I didn't. Tom, I totally resonate with your comments. Some of the same kind of censorship of speech and of publication is also happening at the NIH. And it's horrifying. But
So I did want to start out. There is a question in the Q&A that's asking about, why are these funding cuts happening? Why are we reducing personnel like this? And I'm going to say that there are two major arguments that have been made, and I wanted to throw those out to all of you and just see what you thought about this. One of them is that the major focus is to reduce fraud and abuse. And so let me just stop there. And if
yeah. Well, shall I start? I think a belief that the pharmaceutical industry has the CDC and the NIH and FDA in their pockets is really wrong. All of us who are federal employees had to file disclosure statements. Now, there is conflict of interest in the pharmaceutical industry. It certainly has an investment in the prices of drugs, but a simplistic notion that this is driven by corruption by pharma it leaves most of us who've been part of that like what? So the other thing is the Doge team really looked a lot for fraud and abuse and didn't find much. NIH's awarding of grants is a very rigorous process where 3 layers of scientists look at them, and no one has demonstrated any corruption in that process. Now, people argue perhaps it's not innovative enough, perhaps familiar ideas do better. There are a variety of criticisms one can make of the process, but frankly, not fraud.
Yeah, I'll just comment from the FDA perspective. It's a bit different because I think, as Tom pointed out, what is this, like 80% of the CDC budget goes out to other places, and NIH is mostly a granting agency to the US and the world. FDA is almost all internally spent money. And so I don't think the fraud and abuse has much to do with FDA. It's more a view that federal workers are not hard workers and you don't need so many to get the job done. That was really, I think, the main impetus at FDA. And then a little bit, a modest number of people who were involved in what was called DEI initiatives, efforts to regulate products in a way that led to more equity in terms of health outcomes.
Tom, did you have something?
Yeah, thank you. I think they're going to go up. I think this is actually going to make it worse because they, like I said, they've taken away the scaffolding. We're not going to have the fiscal reviewers like we had. We're not going to have the technical reviewers like we had. We'll be pressured into funding certain partners. I think that's just around the corner. I've even read rumblings of it that they're looking for new.
Okay.
We don't want to fund the old ones. They were terrible. We got to get rid of them and bring in these new ones. And they're not going to be familiar with government regulations, and we're not going to have the people to educate them. I think there's also going to be a lot of waste. I was thinking of one when Josie was talking how NIH had set up this clinical trials setting in South Africa for HIV, and then it was used for COVID vaccine evaluation. So they took advantage of existing networks to add research onto it. That's much more efficient and money saving. But now that's lost. They lost their funding, and they, at least I saw in the news, that they had collapsed. So I think it's actually going to get worse.
Yeah,
The
go ahead.
just to add to that, the current system does not allow political pressure to change grant funding streams. It's very immune to that. And the new guidance that's being created gives the Office of Management and Budget, Russell Vought, the final say on grants, which has generated the possibility of political interference with the granting process, both
Yeah,
up and down.
that's what I was referring to too. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
So there's a question that came in advance from the registered attendees, and it's directed towards Tom. Tom, should people be concerned when traveling to states who opt out of certain childhood mandatory vaccinations? And has Florida considered the potential economic impact on the tourism industry? I'm sure that's speculation on your part, but yeah.
No, great question. And Florida is exactly what comes to mind. And actually, you may have seen there was a follow-up assessment of how many new measles cases that this could create. And I think they came up with 1 million. If vaccination coverage falls by 15%, over 25 years, there'll be 1 million additional cases. And if you look at the case mortality rate, that translates into anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 measles deaths over 25 years in just Florida. So again, that's modeling, but that also should raise concern. And you're going to observe, you'll notice that 25 years ago from now was 2,000. So imagine 1,000 to 3,000 deaths in Florida over the past 25. You would have noticed that. It would have been in the headlines and people would panic. So this Revisiting of mandates and so forth is highly problematic, and you're seeing a lot in the media about it. And pediatricians, my fellow pediatricians, are up in arms. So it's not good. It can't be good.
Yeah. Back to the question about why is this happening, another argument that has come up in the past has been that we should just privatize these functions. I have a lot to say about that, but I'm not going to. I'm going to leave you panelists with weighing in on that. So why don't I just ask that question of each of you?
Uh, Dr. Califf, why don't you start on this one?
Oh, okay.
He's-
Well, it's actually kind of a complicated question with regard to FDA because parts of what FDA does really do, uh, some of it is privatized, and some of it really depends on what you might call public-private partnership. Like if you take the food system, it's very dependent on counties, states, and the industry itself abiding by a set of rules, agreements on how food is going to be grown and distributed. But in general, the idea that private interests could fairly regulate these competitive industries, which are operating at a very high level, just doesn't make a lot of sense. What would happen when conflicts of interest occurred? I've had several conversations today about the drug side of the FDA, and I can't really think of a better system than having civil servants who, by law, can't have a financial interest in any company, including, having to have stocks that are in general portfolios, not investing in individual companies, having them make the decisions about individual products. And imagine if you had a private interest doing that who has other business relationships, um, how could they possibly do it fairly? So um, I would just say it wouldn't work. And Congress, I think, has very much recognized that over the years.
Just to add, NIH funds a lot of basic research that leads to drugs. But the development of drugs is heavily funded in part by the private sector. It builds on a common knowledge base that it is in areas industry is not interested in investing in. Industry is also never interested in comparing the old drug and the new drug. Both Dr. Califf and I have been involved in settings where we wanted to see those kind of comparative effectiveness research happen. And that is something that would never, it's very hard to get drug companies to agree to have their new drug compared with the old one. And generally speaking, prevention and the kind of epidemiology that's often a partnership between the NIH and CDC is also of no interest to the private sector.
Maybe if I can just add quickly, there isn't a lot of money in public health, so I'm not sure how appealing it is to the private sector, but we should always think of them. And the problem is that surveillance is inherently governmental because it gets into security issues, in terms of the defense apparatus and intelligence apparatus and all of that. You just can't widely expand that to the private sector. Private sector, though, can be a partner, and they have been. Running lab tests during COVID was very much by private laboratories, and there's other examples as well. So they can be a partner. And then, of course, if the private sector wants to implement some of these programs, such as violence and suicide prevention in the workplace, there are a lot of prevention programs designed for the workplace. So in that sense, the private sector becomes a beneficiary of the program. So there's lots of ways to look at the private sector, but it's inherently governmental to conduct surveillance and outbreak response. But you can think of them for contracting out certain services. It may be data systems or transport of specimens or logistics. Logistics is a good place where the private sector can play a role, especially during a pandemic, as we saw with COVID and other outbreaks.
So there is a question in the Q&A that is talking about, are we losing or gaining young professionals that are interested in these professions? And I think, Josie, you talked about that a little bit, that that's a major loss, but I was wondering if anybody else had any comments, or Josie, you had more to say about that.
Well, I'm sitting there at a university, and the big damage being done as we speak is with, I would call them, it's not middle age, it's middle-aged young people, I guess. People, because when I hang out with the undergraduates at a place like Duke University, they're still spunky and looking forward to changing the world and all the things like we were as undergraduate students. But when you talk about the postdocs or the people applying for graduate school in the biological sciences, all the programs have already been cut back. So whether they wanted to participate or not, there's a very significant diminution of places. And my friends that are in neighboring countries or countries within reach are delighted with the surge in applicants that they're getting now of young people not wanting to stay in the US because of this environment.
The international impact is huge. We have always been the magnet for scientists for the entire world, and our whole research enterprise has been built on those kind of partnerships. So the impact on people coming from other parts of the world is huge right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think that they don't feel welcome. So talking to my colleagues who are still working overseas, there's a huge sense of mistrust of Americans now, and we can no longer rely on them. So I think that they're looking to other parts of the world to have a career. Hopefully, some will still find their way here, and hopefully, CDC will get back on its feet.
I was talking with somebody recently who said that it's really important in the future that we have reparations for the damage that's being done right now. And one of the questions that came up in the Q&A is just like, how long is it going to take us to recover from this? And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. Again, it's very speculative.
Well, I think it's totally dependent on how long the current trajectory continues. If we want to reverse the current trajectory in the areas that we've been discussing, I feel pretty good that if it doesn't go on too much longer, there could be a surge of sort of reactive excitement about coming to the aid of public health and the well-being of the country. I think some of that depends on how much visibility there is of the damage that's done. As long as it's a reduction in scientists, most people don't relate to that very easily. But if we look at this winter with the triple demic, respiratory syncytial virus, influenza, and COVID, all likely to surge at a time when our hospitals are, particularly rural hospitals, are suffering and not able to surge their capacity, we could have real visible damage done. And I hate to say it, but I think in order to get um, a robust response, it's going to have to be visible damage, and I think that's highly likely. But if this goes on for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, um, it's hard to imagine how it will be recoverable.
Right.
Thoughts from either Tom or Josie on this?
Well, I was just going to add, if we have this next pandemic, there's going to be plenty of opportunity to build your career on the aftermath of that, unfortunately. So there'll be career opportunities, and I think, like Rob was saying, I hope we can move on from this nightmare sooner and still have some recovery capacity. It's kind of like a dying plant. Sometimes there's still a root left here and there. Put some water on it, it comes back. let's hope that that's a possibility in the future. Right now, it would be very difficult to attract anybody to CDC. Though I think the EIS is still going, and that has always been a big magnet for CDC to bring people into that. It's fantastic training, highly competitive, but they may not want to put up with all the uncertainties and be thrown out in the street like so many have been so far.
Tom, would you mind explaining the EIS? Because I think you raised that acronym before in your talk and
So
didn't.
the Epidemic Intelligence Service, it's a 2-year hands-on practicum in field epidemiology, and it's they take 65 a year for 2 years, so there's 130 in place. They get assigned to states, they get assigned to Atlanta, and they stay with that department for the 2 years. I did mine in TB, so I stayed with the TB division for 2 years. And you do nothing but science the whole time. It's wonderful. And then you're almost guaranteed a position afterwards because they're highly trained and in big demand. A lot go to state health departments. I'm not trying to put a plug in for Mike Osterholm, but he's put out this book, the big one. Uh, he has trained more CDC epidemiologists than anybody in Minnesota. So a lot of them are out in the States. If you want to specialize in a certain germ, which a lot of people do at CDC, then you go to headquarters. If you want to be a generalist and do everything, you go to a state health department. So that's a potential, but again, it's only 65 a year. That's a drop in the bucket. If I haven't seen any statistics on how many we've lost. We also do an international version with many countries called the Field Epidemiology Training Program. So that's, but we need a multidisciplinary team. They can't do it alone. You need behavioral scientists for designing the programs. You need data people to collect information and see if you're making a difference. You need surveillance to pick up, new outbreaks. You need people to do that don't have to be as highly laboratory people and so forth. So it takes a multidisciplinary team to operate in public health.
Tom, I'm also very well. Rod, looks like you were going to comment on that.
No, I'm just looking at some of the comments on the screen here.
Yeah. Um, so, Tom, I was also interested. I know that the CDC used to just be the Centers for Disease Control, and then it came the Centers for Disease Control and Injury Prevention, or prevention. And
Yeah, it
as
still is.
yeah, and as part of that, it also expanded into the area of looking at gun safety,
Yeah,
and I know that that's been a political football that's been tossed around for many years, and that the NRA in particular has been very much targeting CDC to get rid of it because of its um, gun violence aspect that you have. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that's faring in the current environment?
well, it's part of a broader issue that we're not popular with a lot of industries, alcohol, tobacco, guns. But we finally have the directive by Congress. Again, we can't do anything without that in our appropriation. And I think in 2019 they got 25 their first funding. Can you believe it? In 2019 for gun violence, $25 million for the whole country. It doesn't go very far, and it's clearly not having results as we see from today's events, unfortunately. But I hope that can keep up. But it was very informative. When I started at CDC, it was there, and then it went away because Congress didn't like it, and it came back in 2019. And again, it's the traditional CDC approach: who, what, where, when, why are these things happening? And you answer that through epidemiologic studies, and you design prevention programs based on what your studies tell you. And so people say CDC is straying too far. No, we have the model for how we approach a problem. That doesn't have to be reinvented every time. So it's very efficient. And we don't fund the entire program. We do it in collaboration with the state and local departments. You want them to contribute because when it comes time for you to pull out, there needs to be something there to pick it up. There's more small seed projects or prototypes, pilot projects, but evaluated to see if they made a difference. And there are many examples of that in injury and prevention. By the way, our injury center director was one of the ones that resigned over the CDC director's firing. So she's out. So
Yeah.
there's another loss. And she started when I was in there in 2013. I remember her first day at work to take over injury prevention, and now we've lost all that. In addition to Dan, our flu guy. So those are painful.
Rob, I'm taking things in a little bit different direction here. So one of the areas that you talked about, which was kind of unique to the FDA, was its focus on tobacco. And the person who was the FDA commissioner at the time, when tobacco was being discussed at the FDA, was David Kessler. And David Kessler just recently put out a petition to allow for the FDA to use its authority to declare certain ultra-processed foods like sweeteners and refined flours and other additives that are not recognized as safe. And this would potentially support RFK Jr.'s goals for making America healthy again. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, so uh, what I would say is we've known for a long time, and it's been in the dietary guidelines that one should eat less salt, less sugar, and less saturated fat. And it turns out if you look at what we call ultra-processed foods, and this is an element of the industry that has grown during my lifetime from nothing to a situation now where the majority of food eaten by Americans is ultra processed because the processing makes it taste better. It may even make you hungrier after you eat it, which is great for the industries that are making the food, but also allows it to last on the shelf longer. And Dr. Kessler, if those of us who know Dr. Kessler, he's been amazing to watch over the years, not just because of his activism, but he has the most amazing ability to gain a huge amount of weight and lose it of anybody I've known in my career. But I think in this last part of his career, I think he's really gotten the key. And what he's pointing out, and I'd also refer to another, Dr. Kevin Hall, who was a really important NIH researcher who's one of the ones who quit because his work was being censored. And Kevin has done some of the most important work on this ultra-processed food issue. But the point they're all making now is that we portrayed this, and so has RFK for the most part. It's just a matter of some chemicals in the food and the coloring in the food, the petroleum-based dyes. But the real problem is the environment in which we live, which is creating an environment where most people without a lot of money can only afford to eat ultra-processed food. They don't have a Whole Foods in their neighborhood. I don't know what the most exciting grocery stores are in California, but and so we're telling people to eat a better diet, but we're not giving them the means to do it. And in fact, just as we talk about cutbacks, one of the most important areas that's been cut back is SNAP, is the support for the very large proportion of our children who depend on the government to eat. And we're cutting back the access to that benefit while chiding them for eating the wrong food. And so I think what we have is agreement on what the best diet is. And one more thing I have to add, because I'm working on this a lot now myself. Unfortunately, in a way, the best diet is just pretty straightforward stuff. Eat stuff that you would fix in your own home and cook in your kitchen. That for the most part would do it and limit the amount of sodium or salt um, and sugar. But there's a huge industry growing, particularly for people with money. And I think knowing different parts of Colorado, having a bunch of family there, in your part is a good example. There's a lot of hooey out there and snake oil being sold at high prices for things like longevity when we really just need to get back to the basics and support it for the broader population. So it's good we have agreement that there's a problem. The solution to it is very much in argument, and most of us feel the current direction of the government is unfortunately in the wrong direction, despite the benefit now of bringing many more people into the discussion on the fact that there's a problem.
So somehow we seem to have lost Tom and his video. Tom, are you still there? Ah,
Yes.
okay, that's great. Tom, we did have a question. Again, this is speculative, but how do we bring back the MMWR? And maybe you can explain what that is and why it's important.
Did we lose the MMWR? No, the MMWR is
I,
the
I thought
central.
they stopped that. They didn't?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't think so, but I'll check. But either way, it's the morbidity and mortality weekly report, MMWR, and it is the gold standard in terms of health department communications around the world. Every national public health agency wants to have something equivalent to the MMWR. So it's not peer reviewed. It's solely CDC authored. When we were going through training, we had to write an MMWR article. It has to be referenced and be about a public health, timely public health issue. And it's a terrific communication piece. So I'd be surprised if that, I haven't heard of
Yeah,
that, but
yeah, it
going
does
away.
seem to still be published. The September 4th issue.
You know what
Wow.
happened? Excuse me. What happened was during uh, COVID, the White House interfered in what the MMWR was saying. And that was really crossing a line that had never been crossed before. That was a total violation of our scientific independence. So that may be what you're referring to. That was a hot topic at the time. So it's objective and it's timely, and it's now written with the state and local health departments so that they get. It used to be as totally anonymous. Now they've added authorship and so forth, so people get credit, which they need for advancement of their career. But it's a very important communicate. Every health department, even when I was in Chicago as medical director for communicable diseases, I had a newsletter for the infectious disease community. So those are very important to have, not just at CDC level, but at the state and local level as well. Because all health is local, and you need to synthesize it down to that level to be useful.
Great. We seem to have a series of questions that are oriented towards the same thing, and I know this is something that I talked about when I started this forum, talking about how it's important to come away with some action items. So one of the specific questions is, what are three things ordinary Americans can do to change the current situation? And Rob, I'm going to start with you with that.
Sure. I mean, number one for me is stay up to date on what's going on to the extent that you can. Number two is talk to your politicians. And, everybody has a congressperson in their district, and they need to hear from people about the concerns that they have. And I'd sort of combine number three into several things, but the general thing for me is to be supportive of your local institutions. There's going to be a lot of stress in the public health arena. So, to the extent that people can volunteer and help out in areas like hospitals or public health clinics or food kitchens, most of the infrastructure of public health is eroded by this reduction in funding that's occurring pretty much across the board. It's going to very differentially affect um, the 60% of Americans who can't currently raise $5,000 for a medical emergency. As you might imagine, they also are on the margin in terms of just getting food. It's about a quarter of our school children are really not have food insecurity, can't be assured of a meal the next day. So I would recommend volunteering right now. But all this will be a losing battle if we don't change politics.
I'm
Tom said we're not political. I was a political appointee twice, so I can't. There's no sense in my saying I'm not political. I am.
so, so Tom, I'm going to turn it over to you because Josie, I know you have slides for this particular section.
Well,
So
yeah, go ahead. Let Tom try
is that
and then.
okay? We'll go to Tom first.
Just say public health is political. The P in public health is politics, but it's not partisan. That's yeah, I agree with Rob. Rely on a credible organization for your information. As my former boss Tom Frieden said, you're not gonna be able to rely on CDC, unfortunately, when we have this contamination of the scientific process, and we'll have to wait till that changes. So, American Academy of Pediatrics for children's vaccinations. I used to be a member. ACOG, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, and others. So, do what Evergreen's doing wherever you can. Engage in informed discussions and keep it peaceful at all levels all the time. No compromise on that. Yeah, I think and speak out for the most vulnerable. I really feel for parents these days with the challenges and a lot of people trying to interpret the COVID guidelines. But stay tuned to your local health department and hopefully they'll. But I realize that's changing every day, at least with COVID vaccination. But the most vulnerable, of course, kids and pregnant women and people with disabilities and minority populations that are at highest risk. And for pandemic preparedness, the public plays a huge role in pandemics, as we saw with COVID and other events. And maybe your health department needs people to hand out leaflets or uh, organize vaccination centers if it comes to that. So check with your local health department if they have volunteer opportunities, or at least understand where they are with pandemic preparedness, because everybody plays a role.
Thank you, Tom. So, Josie, just bear with me while I change things around a little bit here and bring up your slides. Um, Hold on. Hmm. Sorry, there we go. What can we do? Go ahead.
Yeah, so the first thing I did, Penny was saying you have to tell us what we can do, and I initially was a little um, finding that terribly hard because it is hard to make a difference, and a lot of us are worried about how we can be effective. But I think we are increasingly understanding that the question is collective action, and so I do think that discussions like this, being part of community activities, is the absolute key here. And I wanted the recent battle over NIH funding does tell us that advocacy works. And if you click on my slide, it will remind everybody of a very effective organizing group called Research America, which has brought together and created collective action to fight for NIH funding. And as I've told you about the budget battles, it really has worked. disease advocate organizations, if you or your family is affected by a disease, know about the organizations that worry about that and be part of those activities. And as all both of the other panelists have mentioned, think about and understand what's happening locally and your own researchers and universities. The other two panelists, next slide, please. Oh, that's Mary Woolley, who's has been the lead of Research America and has been a wonderful organizer of advocacy. The next slide, please. The other two speakers have talked about protecting vaccination and preparing for possible pandemics, and I'm just echoing what they have said here in this slide. But if we are collectively, if the collective voices are clear, I think that we will see protection of the public health more effectively. So, but again, congratulations to this forum, because this is the kind of thing that produces action.
Well,
Back to you, Penny.
yeah, I wanted to thank all the speakers today. This has been really informative to me, even though I've been working in this field for a while. It's just been wonderful to hear from you all. And I thank you so much. You've taken time out for us locally, and I'm sorry the way that it turned out in terms of not being able to have a discussion at the library, which I think would have been very fruitful. I did want to tell people, though, that we are continuing to host these forums, and upcoming, we have this public land celebration. This land is your land. It's going to be a banquet and speaker at the Tuscany Inn. Reservations are required, $30 per person. And that's going to be Friday, October 17th. Save the date and let us know if you're interested in, and we will get you some more information about that. Some of the upcoming topics for our group is our climate change, emergency preparedness, and water and natural resources. And we are also very interested in hearing from the community about what you are interested in hearing about. We, as I mentioned before, we're into education, discussion, and then action. Part of the education is reading, and in collaboration with the Hearthfire Bookstore, which is here in Evergreen. If you haven't been to it, you should definitely go. It's one of my favorite bookstores. And they order things that are on our list that they can. Some of these are journal articles. But here are, if you wanted to take a picture of this, snapshot of some of our upcoming topics and the reading that we have in these various areas, please do so. I'll just pause for a minute so you can do that. And again, thank you very much for coming. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly. My email is right here. This is recorded, so we are going to see if it's possible for us to send it out to everybody. I apologize for some of the technical issues. I'm used to having a technical support team support me for all of this stuff, and now we're trying to do this on our own, and I think it's okay. It worked out all right. But thank you very much, and thanks again to our speakers.